After the revelation of their secret affair, Grace and Malik's lives changed forever. No one expected their relationship to become known, and now they find themselves in the midst of the devastating consequences of their actions. They both knew that they had made an irreparable mistake, and now they had to deal with the consequences. Grace felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. She destroyed her family, betrayed her husband and daughter, and lost the respect of people who were important to her. Her days were spent in agonizing thoughts about how things could have gone so far. It seemed that until recently everything was under control. Their affair was their personal secret, and now her life has fallen apart. Her home was no longer a quiet haven where she felt safe. George left, Erica didn't talk to her, and it seemed to her that she was all alone in this world. Malik was also in a difficult situation. He could no longer live with his wife. Their marriage was ruined, their trust destroyed. Malik suffered from the realization that he had betrayed not only Erica, but also the entire family that trusted him. Every day was filled with a sense of shame and regret. He couldn't find a place for himself, realizing that his actions had led to so much suffering. The first time they met after the exposure, their communication was strained. Grace tried to hold on, even though everything inside her screamed in pain. She couldn't look into Malika's eyes, realizing that their relationship had become a source of pain for everyone around her.
Malik, I do not know how we got to this point. How could we have come this far?
I do not know, Grace. I ask myself this question every day. It was wrong from the beginning, but we couldn't stop.
They stood in front of each other, but the distance between them seemed greater than ever. It was hard to believe that they had ever been close. There was no warmth in their gazes now that there had been before. Now they were united only by common suffering and awareness of the disaster they had caused. Grace began to lose control of her emotions. Tears began to flow down her cheeks. She couldn't contain all the pain inside of her.
I've ruined my family, Malik. George hates me, Erica. She will never be able to forgive me again. I do not know how to continue living.
Malik came closer, trying to comfort her, but his own hands were shaking. He also felt that his whole world had collapsed.
Grace, I've lost everything too. Erica filed for divorce, and I can't blame her. I can't forgive myself for what I did to her and to all of us.
Their conversation trailed off. Both stood in silence, feeling the weight of their mistakes. The tension between them grew, and each meeting became more difficult. They realized that their relationship was destructive, but there was no way they could change the past. Despite this, Grace kept coming back to the idea that she couldn't live with this guilt. She needed to do something to try to correct her mistakes, even though she knew it might not be possible. Every time she tried to talk to Malik, the gap between them grew. They both tried to deal with the pain in their own way, but that their efforts seemed fruitless. Grace often sat in silence, thinking about her life up to this point. She recalled how happy she and George were at the beginning of their marriage, how proud she was of their family. Now it all seemed like a distant dream. She wanted to go back, but she knew there was no turning back. Malik was also going through his own internal crisis. He realized that he had destroyed his family, and now his everyday was full of regrets. He couldn't find a place for himself, didn't know how to become a respected person again. He was torn apart by the pain of having betrayed everyone he loved. Every day their communication became more intense. Malik tried to comfort Grace, but their relationship could not be the same as before. They could no longer hide behind passion and attraction. Now they were united only by guilt and a sense of loss.
I think we need to stop this communication, Grace. Every time we see each other, it only increases our suffering.
Grace knew Malik was right. Their meetings brought no comfort, only a reminder of what they had done.
Yes, you're right. But what's next? How are we going to live on?
Malik was silent. He didn't know what to say. Both realized that their lives would never be the same again. Each of them had to find their own way, but so far they didn't know how to do it. Over time, the tension between them became unbearable. Grace became more and more withdrawn into herself, not knowing how to cope with her inner feelings. She lost her daughter's trust, her husband left, and now she is left alone in an empty house that was once full of love and happiness. All she has left is the bitterness of the mistakes she made. Malik also felt lost. He tried to restore at least some stability in his life, but he realized that he had destroyed everything he had. There was no forgiveness for him, either from his family or from himself. He kept thinking about how things could have gone so far, but no answers came. One day, after a particularly hard day, Grace decided that she needed to meet Malik one last time to put an end to their relationship. She realized that this was the only way to try to start her life anew, despite all the destroyed bridges. When they met, the tension between them was almost palpable. They understood that this was the last meeting, and that their bond could no longer be saved.
Malik, I want us to stop this forever. I can't live with this burden of guilt anymore. We need to let each other go.
Malik nodded, feeling the same pain. He knew Grace was right. Their relationship has caused destruction, and the only way to move on is to let go of the past.
I understand, Grace. I can't keep living like this either. We both deserve a chance to start over, even if it's going to be difficult.
They exchanged the last words, and at that moment both realized that this was the end of their relationship. They said goodbye, realizing that they would never be able to return to what had been between them. After this meeting, Grace and Malik began to move each on their own path, trying to rebuild their lives, but the realization of their mistakes remained with them forever. After the revelation of the affair with Malik, Grace felt that her life was ruined. She lost her family, her daughter, and most importantly, her husband's trust. Left alone in an empty house, Grace couldn't shake the feeling of utter despair. Every day her soul was tormented by thoughts that she would not be able to return what she had destroyed with her own hands. But despite all this, Grace didn't want to give up. She knew she had to try to repair her relationship with George, if only to partially correct her mistakes. It's been a few weeks since George left their house. Grace lived in complete isolation. She no longer talked to her daughter, Erica, as she refused to even talk to her. All her attempts to get in touch ended up being ignored or coldly rebuked. It broke her heart, but Grace understood that Eric could understand. How can you forgive a mother who betrayed her own daughter? But she hoped that perhaps in time the wounds would heal and they would be able to speak again, at least as mother and daughter. However, Grace now understood that her main task was to restore her relationship with George. He was her life partner, the man she had lived with for many years, and although their marriage had long ceased to be the same as in the beginning, Grace still had deep feelings for him. She knew that she had hurt him badly, but she believed that if she honestly confessed her mistakes, he would be able to forgive her. One evening, gathering her thoughts, Grace decided to call George. She stared at the phone screen for a long time, afraid to dial his number, but eventually she did it. The bell rang 3 times before she heard his voice.
Grace.
His voice was cold, as if there was an invisible wall between them. But Grace was already ready for this.
George, please don't hang up. We need to talk.
There was silence, and Grace thought for a moment that he might just hang up. But George didn't do it.
What do you want, Grace?
His voice was full of disappointment and fatigue, and Grace felt her heart clench with pain again. She gathered all her strength and answered,
I know I've made a lot of mistakes. I realize that I betrayed you, and I understand that it will be hard for you to forgive me, but please give me a chance to explain myself.
George was silent for a few seconds before answering.
What's there to explain, Grace? Everything has already happened. You betrayed me and our family.
Those words hit Grace, but she knew she deserved them. She couldn't deny that her actions were terrible, and she knew that it couldn't be fixed with a simple apology.
You're right. I betrayed you. I let us both down. But I'm asking you to at least listen to me. We've been together for so many years, George. It can't just be crossed out.
George sighed heavily. Good, let's meet. But don't expect it to change anything. This answer gave Grace a small spark of hope. He agreed to the meeting, and that was something. Perhaps she still has a chance to restore the relationship a little. The next day, they met at a small cafe that was far from their home. It was a place they rarely visited, so that no one would see them together, because rumors had already spread through their common circle of friends. Grace arrived first and sat fidgeting with her hands. She knew that this was going to be one of the most difficult meetings of her life. When George entered the cafe, she immediately noticed how much he had changed. He looked tired, his face was serious, and there was deep sadness in his eyes. He sat down opposite her, and silence fell between them.
You wanted to talk. I'm listening.
Grace knew she had to be honest. There was no point in hiding anything now or trying to mitigate his mistakes. George, I'd like to start by saying that I'm sorry. I know it's not enough to fix everything, but it's true. I'm really sorry about what happened. I do not know how I could have gone so far. It seemed to me that our relationship had cooled down, and I started looking for something that I hadn't felt for a long time. She paused, hoping that he would say something in response, but George just remained silent, listening to her.
You've always been a pillar of support for me, but over the years we've started to lose each other. I felt like you didn't see me as a woman anymore, that you were distant, and instead of trying to talk to you, I made a terrible mistake.
George looked at her, his face showing nothing but fatigue.
I'm not going to justify you, Grace, but I'm not perfect either. Maybe I've really become less attentive to you, but that doesn't excuse what you've done.
Grace nodded, agreeing with his words. I know. I'm not asking for excuses. I just want you to understand that I still love you despite everything, and I'm asking you for a second chance. I understand that maybe this is too much, but I can't live with this feeling without trying to fix it. George was silent for several minutes, his gaze focused on the table. He seemed to be thinking about what to say. Finally, he spoke.
Grace, I do not know if I will ever be able to forgive you. You ruined everything we had. But I can't deny that we've lived together for many years and we've had good times. I need time to think about it.
Those words were like a ray of light in the dark for Grace. He didn't reject her right away, which already seemed like a step forward. She knew she hadn't won yet, but at least she had a chance.
I understand, George, and I'm ready to give you all the time you need. I just hope that you can understand me and maybe forgive me in time.
George nodded, his face still serious.
I'll let you know when I'm ready for the next conversation, but don't get your hopes up too high yet.
With that, he got up and left, leaving Grace sitting in the cafe with a heavy heart. But despite everything, she felt a little hopeful. This conversation made her realize that everything might not be lost yet, that maybe their family could recover after all this. After this meeting, Grace began to realize that rebuilding a relationship with George would take a lot of time and effort. She realized that just words are not enough. She needs to act. The first step was to work on yourself. Grace realized that despite all the excuses, she had to take responsibility for her actions and their consequences. She started going to a psychologist to sort herself out and understand why she took this step. Every day it became clearer to her that her actions were the result not only of problems in her marriage, but also of her own dissatisfaction with life. Grace understood that her relationship with George was gradually cooling, but instead of working on it, she was just looking for a way out in another person. A few months later, George called Grace and offered to meet again. She agreed with a sinking heart, knowing that this meeting could be decisive. After Malik and Grace's affair was revealed, Malik's life changed dramatically. He was the center of attention, but not in the way he was used to. Instead of the previous respect and sympathy from his friends and colleagues, he faced condemnation and contempt. Many turned away from him, not wanting to have anything to do with the man who betrayed his wife and destroyed his family. Malik understood that his mistakes could not be fixed so easily, and that his life would never be the same again. It all started when his best friends, with whom he had been in contact for many years, suddenly stopped responding to his calls and messages. When Malik tried to meet with them in person to explain the situation and possibly get support, their reaction was not what he expected. One evening, after several days of unsuccessfully trying to reconnect with friends, Malik decided to go to the bar where they usually gathered. He knew that he risked meeting them there and hoped that they would at least listen to him. When he entered the bar, he immediately noticed them sitting at a table in the corner. But as soon as he approached them, their views changed.
Malik, why are you here?
James, his old friend, with whom they had gone through many difficulties, looked at him with a cold expression on his face. They had been inseparable before, but now there was no hint of friendly warmth in his eyes.
I came to talk. You're all ignoring me, and I'd like to explain myself.
There was a pause. The other friends at the table exchanged glances. None of them invited Malik to sit down. He stood in awkward silence, feeling the tension build up.
And what are you going to explain? Everything is already clear. You cheated on Erica with her mother. You don't seem to have anything to explain.
These words struck Malik like lightning. He expected condemnation, but was not prepared for how harsh it would be. He tried to justify himself.
I know I made a terrible mistake, but I'm not trying to justify myself. I just want you to understand that it didn't happen the way everyone thinks it did. Everything got out of control.
James grinned, his gaze filled with contempt.
Out of control. Malik, you crossed a line that no one should have crossed. You betrayed your wife and destroyed your family. Do you think we can just forget about it?
Malik felt the ground slipping away from under his feet. He knew that his action had no excuses, but he still hoped that his friends would at least try to understand him.
I just want to fix everything. I realize that I did the wrong thing, but I don't want to lose you all. You are the only ones I have left.
Malik, you lost us the moment you betrayed Erica. You are no longer the person we knew.
Malik felt a lump rise in his throat. He couldn't believe that his relationship with his friends had collapsed so quickly. A few months ago, they were inseparable, sharing their problems, laughing, going through difficult moments together. And now it's all gone. He wanted to say something in response, but realized that any words would be meaningless. Instead, he just nodded and, without saying a word, turned around and left the bar. Once outside, he felt a wave of despair wash over him. He has lost not only his family, but also friends who have been a part of his life for many years. The days passed in silence and solitude. Malik became more and more withdrawn into himself, realizing that his life would never be the same again. He tried to find solace in his work, but even there it was different. Colleagues who used to communicate with him on equal terms now avoided him. He became an outcast, a man everyone whispered about behind his back, but no one wanted to deal with. Malik tried to focus on his work to take his mind off everything that was going on in his life, but his thoughts kept returning to what he had lost. Every day Malik returned to the empty apartment. He could no longer live with Erica. Their marriage was ruined, and she filed for divorce. They didn't talk much. All his attempts to talk to her ended in cold, short answers. She didn't want to see him and wasn't going to forgive him. One evening, sitting on the couch in the dark, Malik realized that his life was completely ruined. He lost his wife, family, friends, and the respect of society. He knew it was all his fault, but he didn't know how to move on. He couldn't fix his mistake. It was like an irreparable scar on his life. A few weeks later, Malik decided to seek help from a psychologist. He realized that he could no longer cope with his condition on his own. He needed to sort out his feelings and figure out how to move on. In the first session, he felt awkward, not knowing where to start. The psychologist, a woman named Dr. Tracy, was attentive and supportive.
Malik, I understand that it's not easy for you right now. Do you want to tell me what brought you here?
Malik was silent for a moment, trying to collect his thoughts.
I ruined everything. My life. I've lost everything. Family, friends, wife. Everyone turned their backs on me.
Do you feel isolated?
Malik nodded.
Yes, I understand that I am to blame for everything, but it doesn't ease the pain. I do not know how to live on.
Dr. Tracy looked at him sympathetically.
You made a serious mistake, and it changed your life. But the first step is to acknowledge that you are ready to work on yourself. You understand that not everything can be returned, but you can learn to live with it.
Malik sighed. It was hard for him to hear these words, but he knew it was true. He couldn't bring back the past, couldn't fix what had already happened.
I do not know if I will ever be able to forgive myself for what I did.
Dr. Tracy looked at him carefully.
Forgiveness is a difficult process, but it's important to start by understanding why you made this mistake. We can figure this out together, and maybe in time you can find a way to win our peace.
These words gave Malik a little hope. He didn't know if he would ever be able to completely get rid of the guilt, but he knew he had to at least try. Each session with Dr. Tracy helped him realize his actions and sort out his feelings. Over time, Malik began to look for ways to rehabilitate himself in the eyes of society. He realized that just apologizing was not enough and began to participate in community initiatives, helping other people who found themselves in difficult life situations. He realized that he would not be able to regain his former respect, but at least he could try to do something good for others. He joined charities that helped people in difficult circumstances. It became a way for him to regain at least a little self-esteem. He started working with teenagers, helping them cope with life problems and sharing his experiences. Malik hoped that his story could be a warning to someone so that they would not repeat his mistakes. Despite the fact that it made him feel better, Malik still couldn't get rid of the inner emptiness. He realized that his life would never be the same, that he had lost too much to ever return to a normal life. But he continued to struggle, hoping that one day he would find inner peace and forgiveness, both from himself and from others. Every day was a new battle for him, but he learned to live with it. After the betrayal of her mother and husband, Erica found herself in a state of deep inner pain and confusion. What happened destroyed her trust in the people closest to her, and she felt like her world had collapsed. Having experienced such betrayal from the two main figures in her life, her mother and her husband, Erica realized that she could no longer trust anyone, and this feeling permeated her more and more every day. The first weeks after the exposure were full of chaos and anxiety. Erica tried to keep an outward calm, continuing to go to work, performing her daily duties, but a storm of emotions raged inside her. Every time she was alone, her thoughts would return to what had happened. She replayed the moment in her head when she saw Malik and Grace kissing, and over again she couldn't believe that it had actually happened. Erica has always considered her mother to be a role model, a strong, confident woman who lived a long and happy life with her father. She couldn't imagine Grace being capable of such betrayal. Her mother, the same woman who had always taught Erica to be honest and faithful, had broken the most sacred family ties. And Malik, her husband, with whom she shared everything, was the one who betrayed her in the most cruel way. She felt humiliated and trampled on. Every day Erica became more and more distant from Malik and Grace. It was impossible for her to even think about communicating with them. Every time she saw them, she was overcome with pain and anger that could not be suppressed. She realized that the only way to deal with this was to completely exclude them from her life. Erica moved into another apartment and changed her phone number so that neither Malik nor Grace could contact her. She didn't want to hear their excuses or apologies. It was all too clear to her. They had betrayed her, and now she had to somehow deal with it on her own. One of the ways to get away from the pain was work. Erica plunged into it with her head, trying to fill the void inside herself. She took on more tasks than she could handle and spent more time in the office than ever. Her job became her refuge from reality. Erica became successful, her career began to grow rapidly, and her colleagues admired her efficiency and energy. However, inside she felt that all this was just a way to numb the pain and not solve the real problems. Work helped to distract her, but Erica realized that she needed more than just a distraction. Gradually, she began to realize that her father, George, had also suffered from Grace's betrayal. George, who had always been quiet and calm and had taken care of his family for many years, was just as devastated as she was. Erica did not immediately realize how much this event affected him, since George was not a person who openly expressed his emotions. However, now that his world had been destroyed as well, they both needed each other's support. Erica began spending more time with her father, trying to restore their relationship, which had been strained after George. Although George was a faithful husband and father, after his divorce from Grace, he withdrew into himself, which affected their relationship with Erica. They used to communicate, but their conversations were superficial, and Erica never felt a deep emotional rapprochement with her father. However, now after the betrayal, they both realized that they only had each other left. The first meetings were not easy. George was still withdrawn and avoided talking about what had happened. Erica tried to question him, but he answered in monosyllables, as if afraid to start a long and frank conversation. They often sat in silence until the moment came when Erica went home, feeling disappointed that their communication did not go beyond the phrases of duty. But she didn't give up, knowing that she and George needed to overcome this barrier. Over time, George began to open up gradually. One evening, as they were sitting on the veranda of his house, George suddenly started talking about Grace. Erica froze, listening to his words. He didn't talk about betrayal directly, but his voice was full of pain and disappointment. It was the moment when Erica realized how much George was suffering. It was the first time they had discussed their feelings so openly. George shared that he felt abandoned and betrayed, that he still couldn't believe that his marriage, which seemed so strong, had collapsed because of infidelity. Listening to her father, Erica felt a deep emotional connection with him for the first time in a long time. They both found themselves in the same position, betrayed by those they loved. Now they were not only father and daughter, but also people who shared a common pain. At this point, their relationship began to recover. Since then, Erica and George have been spending more time together. They started meeting every night after work, cooking dinners, watching movies, or just talking. These meetings were a real support for both of them. Erica understood that despite all that had happened, she still had a strong and important relationship with her father. It helped her cope with the feeling of loneliness and betrayal that haunted her every day. George, in turn, was grateful that Erica had not turned her back on him after her divorce from Grace. He began to see her not only as his daughter, but also as a person who helped him cope with pain. He understood that their bond had become much stronger than ever before. George began to share his thoughts and feelings with Erica, which he had never done before. He opened up to her, telling her about his fears and doubts, and this helped them both overcome the crisis. One day, Erica suggested that George go on a trip. It was an unexpected offer, but George agreed. They decided to visit a place where they often visited as a family when Erica was still a child. This place was associated with many fond memories, and for both of them it became a symbol of the restoration of their bond. The trip was surprisingly easy and relaxed. They laughed, recalled the past, and discussed the future. Erica felt that this journey had helped them both regain their lost trust and intimacy. Despite the fact that her relationship with George became a source of comfort for Erica, she understood that her trust problems would not disappear just like that. It was difficult for her to build a new relationship. She was afraid that she would be betrayed again. Every time someone showed interest in her, she immediately remembered Malik and Grace's betrayal. This fear became a barrier that prevented her from moving on. Erica realized that her life had changed forever. But thanks to her father's support, she gradually began to find the strength to move forward. She realized that she could handle it and maybe one day trust people again. But for that, she needed time to heal her mental wounds and restore inner balance. After their affair was exposed and the devastating consequences became apparent, Grace and Malik found themselves in a state of deep emotional and moral crisis. Each of their meetings was now filled not with passion and attraction, but with bitter reflections on what they had done. Their inner feelings of guilt and shame did not leave them, and each of them realized how much they had harmed not only themselves, but also those they loved. Their passion, which once seemed overwhelming, has now turned into a devastating storm, leaving only pain and regret in its wake. Their first meeting after the exposure was especially difficult. Both came to her with different emotions, Grace with a feeling of complete emptiness and a broken heart, and Malik with the weight of guilt and the realization that he betrayed his wife and ruined his life. Their relationship had seemed special to them before, but now it was like a poisonous fruit that they both bit off, and the consequences were much worse than they could have imagined. At this meeting, both of them were silent for a long time, not knowing where to start. All the passion that had once bound them had vanished, leaving only pain. Grace realized that for the sake of her fleeting emotions, she had jeopardized her family, her daughter's trust, as well as her long-term marriage. She felt like a traitor to everyone she loved, especially her daughter Erica, who could no longer look at her without tears and anger. This breakdown of trust between mother and daughter was for Grace the most painful consequence of her affair with Malik. Malik was aware that he had completely destroyed his future with Erica. He saw how she was losing trust in him, how her love for him was disappearing under the yoke of betrayal. He knew that he would never be able to earn her forgiveness again. Malik began to realize that his love for Grace was a mistake that led to him losing everything he had. His feelings for her now seemed empty and meaningless compared to what he had destroyed. With each passing day, the realization that their affair was a mistake became clearer to both of them. In the past, their attraction seemed somehow inevitable, as if they couldn't resist their emotions. But now that the affair was revealed and the consequences became real, they had to face the truth. Their relationship was nothing more than the result of their own weaknesses and emotional dissatisfaction. They realized that they were looking for salvation from their personal problems in each other, but instead only deepened their suffering. Malik began to realize that his interest in Grace was more an attempt to escape from the problems in his own marriage than true love. The attention and care he sought from Grace was what he lacked in his relationship with Erica. But now he realized that these problems needed to be solved with his wife, and not to seek solace on the side. He felt that he had betrayed not only Erica, but also himself by changing his values and moral principles. Grace, in turn, was aware that her feelings for Malik were the result of her own crisis in her marriage to George. She tried to find in the young man what she lacked at home: attention, care, emotional intimacy. But now she understood that her relationship with Malik was an escape from reality, an attempt to fill an inner void. That emptiness remained, but now a sense of guilt for ruined lives has been added to it. They started discussing their feelings and eventually came to the conclusion that their affair was a huge mistake. Each of them felt pain and disappointment, but most importantly, they realized that their relationship had no future. Both of them realized that continuing these meetings was not only pointless, but also wrong. Their romance was not originally built on healthy foundations, and now it has become more than obvious. Malik offered to stop any contact and try to rebuild their lives separately from each other. He knew that their relationship could no longer exist, and even if they tried to continue, it would only lead to further suffering. Grace agreed with him. She also understood that their relationship could not continue, and that each of them had to deal with the consequences on their own. They both decided to separate and not meet again. Malik left to start his life with a clean slate, away from Erica and Grace's family. He understood that his reputation and people's trust had been destroyed, and he needed to rebuild his life. This decision was not easy for him, but he knew that it would be better for everyone. Grace was left alone, realizing that now she would have to face the consequences of her actions and find a way to rebuild her life. She understood that her marriage with George was ruined forever, and her relationship with her daughter could not be restored either. She lost everyone she cared about, and it was a hard blow for her. This story left Grace and Malik with an emptiness in their soul, and with the realization that their decision to be together was nothing more than an illusion that destroyed their lives. Now each of them had to learn to live with the consequences of their actions, cope with guilt, and try to find a new meaning in life without each other. It was a period of self-discovery and reflection for Grace. She had to look at herself from a new angle and realize her mistakes. She began to realize that her affair with Malik was an attempt to avoid solving her own problems, but now she had to face them face to face. Grace realized that she had to find the strength to accept her guilt and move on. Malik, for his part, was trying to start a new life. He understood that he had to restore his reputation and earn the forgiveness of those he had betrayed, but he also realized that it would be a long and difficult process. Now that his affair with Grace was over, he needed to focus on becoming the best version of himself, learning from this painful experience and trying to fix his mistakes. And although their paths have now parted, Grace and Malik both realized one important truth: their romance was a mistake that changed their lives forever. Now they had to deal with the consequences left by this novel and try to find a way to redemption and inner peace, each in their own way. After the devastating end of their relationship, Grace and Malik found themselves on the verge of complete emotional exhaustion. Both realized that their romance, which once seemed so important and all-consuming, left behind only pain and ruined lives. The problems they were now facing were much deeper than they could have imagined at the beginning of their relationship. For each of them, there came a moment when they needed to decide how to move on with their lives and find a way to deal with guilt, disappointment, and loss. Grace, whose life was filled with guilt, decided she couldn't handle it on her own anymore. Every day she felt the weight of her mistakes. The relationship with her daughter Erica remained in a state of complete rupture, and Grace did not know how to regain her trust. Every glance at the photos from family holidays, every corner of their once cozy home reminded her that she had destroyed her family. Her husband George filed for divorce, not wanting to have anything more to do with her, and this was the last blow for her. During the first months after her affair with Malik was exposed, Grace sank into a state of constant depression. She couldn't sleep. She was plagued by nightmares in which she relived the moments of exposure over and over again. With each passing day, her inner pain intensified, and she felt like she was losing control of her life. Even simple activities like cooking or walking down the street became a challenge for her. Grace could no longer see herself in the mirror without feeling deeply ashamed. Her heart broke every time she thought about her daughter, who was now like a stranger to her. One day, sitting in the silence of her empty apartment, Grace realized that she couldn't go on like this. She could not go back and correct her mistakes, but it was no longer possible to live in this state. She needed to do something to start rebuilding her life, otherwise guilt and depression would have consumed her completely. Grace decided to seek help from a professional psychologist to deal with her emotions and find a way to forgiving herself and, perhaps, forgiving those she betrayed. The first sessions with a psychologist were painful for Grace. It was hard for her to open up and talk about her actions. She couldn't talk about her betrayal without crying and feeling deep inner pain. But gradually she began to realize that her mistake was not just the result of passion, but the result of accumulated problems in her marriage and her own emotional dissatisfaction. Her psychologist helped her see that although her actions were destructive, she shouldn't get stuck in the past. Grace began to realize that in order to move on, she needed to accept her guilt, but at the same time forgive herself for what she had done. One of the most difficult aspects of her recovery was the realization that forgiveness would not come immediately. She couldn't just decide that she was forgiving herself and go on living as if nothing had happened. She needed time to go through all the stages of grief, from denial to acceptance. Her psychologist suggested that she practice self-compassion techniques such as meditation, visualization, and keeping a diary to help deal with negative emotions. Grace realized that the healing process would be long, but she was willing to go through it to get her life back. In parallel with this process, Grace began to make attempts to establish a relationship with her daughter. She wrote Erica a long letter in which she openly talked about her feelings, her remorse, and her desire to restore at least part of their relationship. Grace didn't expect instant forgiveness, but she hoped that her honesty and openness would help Erica understand what she was going through. There was no immediate response, and Grace knew it would take time. But the letter itself was an important step towards healing for her, as she was able to express her pain and remorse. Malik, like Grace, was trying to find a way to rebuild his life after a devastating affair. He had lost everything: his marriage to Erica, the trust of his friends, and self-respect. Every day for him became a struggle with feelings of guilt and uselessness. Malik understood that he had betrayed the woman who believed in him and ruined all the plans and dreams that he and Erica had built together. He also knew that he was unlikely to ever be able to regain her trust or earn her forgiveness. After the breakup, Malik felt lost. His old life, which seemed so stable and fulfilling, collapsed in one moment. He could no longer count on the support of his friends and colleagues, who also turned away from him after learning about his betrayal. He was alone and deep in thought about how he could have made such a mistake. Malik was aware that the affair with Grace was an attempt to avoid the problems that existed in his marriage with Erica. But now he realized that this flight only made the situation worse. At some point, Malik decided that he needed to move on, leaving the past behind. He couldn't bring back what he had destroyed, but he could try to build a new life. Malik started looking for a job in another city, away from his past surroundings, to start over with a clean slate. The move became for him a symbol of a new beginning, a chance to rebuild his life, get rid of a heavy sense of guilt, and find inner peace. Malik also began attending therapy to sort out his feelings and try to forgive himself for his mistakes. The healing process for Malik was also long and painful. He knew that he would never be able to completely get rid of the consequences of his actions, but gradually he began to find ways to deal with the guilt. He devoted his time to work and self-development, trying not to repeat the mistakes that led him to destroy his own life. Malik understood that forgiveness would not come instantly, but every day he began to feel that his life could take on a new meaning. Grace and Malik were no longer in touch. Each of them was focused on their own path to recovery, and they understood that their further communication would only complicate this process. They decided to separate forever, leaving their mistakes in the past and trying to build a future apart from each other. Despite the pain and suffering they both went through, This period of their lives became a time of deep self-discovery for them. Grace began to see that her happiness did not depend on a relationship with someone else, but was based on her own ability to cope with difficulties and forgive herself for mistakes. She also realized that her marriage to George had long been problematic, and their breakup was inevitable. The affair with Malik only accelerated this process. Malik, in turn, has learned to accept his weaknesses and mistakes. He realized that trying to avoid problems by fleeing into other relationships was a mistake, and began to work on becoming a more responsible and mature person. He sought to regain his self-respect and start a new life based on honesty and sincerity, both towards others and himself. Forgiveness became an important part of their healing for both of them, but each realized that forgiveness is not just a decision, but a process that requires time and patience. Grace gradually began to find peace within herself, realizing that she could not change her past, but could control how she would live in the future. She began to build new connections, open up to the world and the people around her, trying to restore her self-esteem. Malik also found the strength to move on with his life. His new job and new environment had become a source of renewal and growth for him. He began to appreciate sincere relationships that are built on trust and respect, and tried not to repeat the mistakes that led to his downfall. A few years after these events, Grace and Malik became different people. They have learned to live with the consequences of their mistakes, but they have also learned to forgive themselves. This experience, although it left deep scars, helped them both realize that they could recover and start their lives anew. Now they could both look to the future with confidence, knowing that each of them had gone through difficult trials and came out of them stronger and wiser.